Good evening, folks. I want to welcome everybody to this session. I'm just going to turn my camera on over there. It's wonderful to see that there are so many people making their way into the room, and it's a great honor to be hosting this session this evening on Holocaust-themed literature in the classroom. I would like to introduce our panelists in just a moment, but just before we do, I'd like to also take this opportunity, as much as it's my pleasure to welcome everybody into this space, to also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I am sitting at the moment, being the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. And I'd like to extend that to the First Nations of the lands on which people joining us today, potentially from all around Australia, might be as well. I have the great pleasure of introducing three wonderful panelists this evening. I'm going to invite my panelists actually to turn their cameras on. I will be joining them in conversation on this very important theme, and uh, and would like to invite people attending as well to please feel free throughout this session to send your questions in through the chat box that the panelists might be able to respond. But joining us today, we have Susie Zale, Anita Seltzer, and Patricia Di Donato. Susie is, of course, an internationally published author of young adult novels that shine a light on injustice. Her most recent young adult novel, which we will be speaking a little about this evening, is called Inkflower, and it draws on her childhood and tells the story of a man who, in his last months with motor neuron disease, reveals to his daughter a Holocaust story he's kept hidden. This novel, Inkflower, won Kids' Choice for Book of the Year Older Readers at the 2024 CBCA Awards, and it was shortlisted for the Booklinks Historical Novel Award, Yabbers, and the ASLA Dance Awards. Susie, thank you very much for joining us. Uh, it's a great pleasure to also have Anita Seltzer here with us this evening. Anita is an award-winning author of nonfiction with 15 books published. Her most recent book, in fact, The Female Gaze in Art and Photography, has won 4 international awards in New York, Los Angeles, and the UK. This evening, we'll be talking a bit about Anita's book, which is based on her family story, titled I Am Sasha, which was one of three that were shortlisted for the New South Wales Premier's Prize in History in 2019. And it's a very great pleasure this evening to be able to introduce Patricia Di Donato. Trish grew up in Wangaratta and she attended La Trobe University in Bendigo to complete a Bachelor of Arts in Literature and History. She began her teaching career in 2001 and she currently teaches at Bendigo Southeast College. Trish participated in the Melbourne Holocaust Museum's Teacher Professional Learning Program just last year in 2024, and she has a passion for using Holocaust-themed literature in the classroom, which is something that we're going to be speaking about in somewhat more detail this evening, and really delving into how one might use literature of this nature. So I want to thank all three of my panelists, Susie, Anita, and Trish, for joining us this evening for this chat.
Absolute pleasure.
I might actually, if I may, start with a question to the two authors in the room. I'm also, before we kind of really delve into, what these books are and how one might use them, I'm really interested in what was it that motivated you to actually set about writing what was fundamentally so personal a story.
Who would you like to go first?
Anita, how about yourself?
Okay, my grandmother many years ago handed me a manila folder, and she said, "You're just starting to write, and I would like you to write the story of your father and I, how we survived the war, how we survived the Holocaust." And she handed over this manila folder and said to me, "I really want you to promise you'll do this." So it was a bit of a surprise. I didn't expect anything. When I was growing up, my family used to tell me your father was a girl in the war, and they never said anything else. And I was quite young and didn't question it. Anyway, all these years later, I opened up that manila folder and I was blown away by what was inside. I could not believe what I was reading. My grandmother saved my father during the Holocaust by turning him into a 12, 13-year-old girl. He was a boy on the cusp of manhood. His voice luckily hadn't broken because it was probably the malnutrition in the war. And he was the bones of the story of I Am Sasha. And I endeavored to write the book. So I hadn't, like Susie, I hadn't written for young adults before. I had only written historical books, and it was very challenging. And suddenly I had to create scenes and have dialogue and have the historical background and develop characters. It was a whole new thing, and so that personal request was the reason that I Am Sasha's born.
Thank you. And we'll come to some of those challenges in a moment. But if I may, and sorry, just before I turn Susie to you, just for the benefit of people listening, for anybody who's not familiar with your book, Anita, can you just explain why exactly did your grandmother need to disguise your father as a girl?
Well, my grandmother felt, if he stayed as a boy, he could be accosted in the street. Nazis could order him to pull down his pants. His circumcision would give him away. And if he was a girl, they wouldn't be at such a high risk. No one would ask a girl to sort of take off the clothes.
Right, thank you. Um, we'll come, as I say, to some of the challenges with writing a story that addresses issues of that nature for young adults, and some of the challenges with using them in the classroom as well. But I might ask Susie first, what motivated you to set about writing Inkflower?
Yeah, similarly to Anita, it was a story learnt very late in my life. In 1998, when I was 32, my dad was diagnosed with motor neurone disease and given 6 months to live. And he very quickly came to us and he said, "We're not going to waste the next 6 months crying. We're going to talk." The first thing he wanted to talk about was a Holocaust story that he kept hidden from us. And so he very dramatically flew all of us, me, my brothers, my mother, our children, we had babies at that time, to Fiji, over 9 nights, more than 25 hours, told us his story. A story I think he hadn't told us because when he came to Australia as a 17-year-old orphan, looked around and saw these smiling Australian faces, he decided right then that the war had been an aberration, that people were good and people were kind. So he kind of disconnected from the past, I guess, as a way of moving forward. And he covered over his number tattoo with a tattoo of a flower because he wasn't a number anymore and he wasn't a victim. Anyway, we came home and I spent the next 6 months, which turned into 5 years that he survived the illness, talking, asking questions. And the more I asked, the more I learned, the closer we became. And, got to ask him questions that a daughter would never normally ask a father, like, what do you dream about at night? What are you scared of? How do you want to live your last days? And even when he could no longer talk because he had a tracheostomy tube and he lost his voice, he would type his answers that really changed our relationship. And watching him live so bravely and graciously in those last years and using it as a time to deepen his relationships and grow as a person and all the lessons he taught about us, about living and dying and about the Holocaust. I knew I had a story to tell. And it was the night he was dying, and the night that the doctors told us he would leave. And I remember going into his room, and I don't know. I guess I just wanted to see him leave with a smile on his face. I pictured him, leaving us. And I said, "Dad, I promise you, your story will be published. People will read
Wow.
about your experience of the Holocaust. They will learn about, the dangers of hate, and they will also learn how to die without fear or regret." Anyway, I made a promise to my dad I had to keep. I was a lawyer at the time and I quit and I went back to uni to learn how to write. And a year later, an adult book called The Tattooed Flower, which was like a father-daughter memoir, was published. And I fast forward 18 years and I'd kept my promise to my father to share his story. I'd written The Tattooed Flower. I'd written a few Holocaust fiction novels for teenagers. But something was just drawing me back to the past. And I think now that I've thought about it, I think it was fear. What had happened to my father as a child scared me. And what was still happening, how we were still hating each other in the 2000s, scared me too. And it made me angry. And I thought, what do you do with all that fear and anger?
Mm.
Revenge is nice, but I think change is better. And who better to target than teenagers who are kind of still working out how they want to show up in the world. And so I created this version for young adults called Ink Flower, same true story of my father's Holocaust experience and him telling it to us. But now instead of being a 32-year-old woman, I am 16-year-old Lisa
Mhm.
who has her own secrets.
Right. It's very beautiful, and if I may, Trish, I will come to you in a moment. I'm just minded that, it seems that there's a promise really at the heart of both of your endeavors, and they're both very personal stories. Is it challenging putting something so personal of yourself and of your family out there for kids around the country and around the world to read?
I'll let Anita go first if you
Oh,
want.
well, thank you, Susie. For me, the challenge was um, I felt I was living. As I was writing my father's story, I felt I was living it, going through it with him and with my grandmother. And that was, for me, extremely challenging emotionally. Also, unlike Susie, I had not written in this genre before, so that was really pressing my buttons to address all those issues, to be able to write the story in the way it's written. And when I actually wrote it originally, I wrote it in my grandmother's voice. I was introduced to the former CEO, Bob Sessions of Penguin Books, and he said, Anita, this story's amazing, but you have to rewrite it in the boy's voice. So
Mm.
first of all, I wrote it in my grandmother's voice, and which was hard enough, and then it was a lot harder to write it in my father's voice because I had to write it as a boy, as an adolescent. Um, so that threw open more questions, how do I find that voice? So I looked at other young adult books, and then I started remembering my two boys. I have a daughter and two sons, what they were like in those adolescent years. So it was a combination of
Mm.
trying to find my way. And that was my experience.
And now you have kids of that age that are reading that story. And
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. I've been to quite a few schools where I Am Sasha's taught, and the kids are just so blown away by the story, and they come up to me at the end of me talking to the class, and it's so heartwarming. It's really heartwarming. And they're so, the disbelief and how did he do it, and how did your grandmother do it? We can't imagine. And it was just, it's very soulful, and I wish my grandmother and my father were here to see it.
oh, thank you, Anita.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's hard. It is hard to write such a personal story because you have to go to hard places. You have to dig in emotionally. My father died 18 years before I started writing Inkflower, and I think in all that time, I'd
Oops.
down to writing Flower, um, that I really let myself grieve, I think, because I remember sitting down at my desk that first day and just making myself really go there because, we were raised much like my father. To let go of sadness, to smile, we were glass half full people. We didn't excavate our feelings. We just got on with things. That was how my dad taught us to, I guess, to live, to survive. But sitting there, I just forced myself and I just said, how would it feel? How would it feel to be a 15-year-old girl and find out your father was about to die? And how would it feel to be a 14-year-old boy
Right.
who's just been delivered to the gates of Auschwitz and that lost everyone he loved? And I remember I just started bawling. It was the first time I think I really let myself feel the feelings and sit with the story and unpick it and really think about the day to day because I was writing this boy. I had to be him.
Right.
And, it was hard, but more than being hard, it was beautiful. I got to spend 2 more years with my dad. I got to do all this research where um, I saw the boat that he came into Australia. I saw pictures of the mines where he worked at the concentration camps. I saw the Bonegilla migrant camp where he found his feet in 1950s Melbourne.
Right.
And it was just
Which really,
really,
which makes it real in a way, doesn't it? Like it really brings that history home to see those places.
oh, totally real. And I think another a beautiful thing about it was I got to give my dad back his voice. He'd lost it twice. He lost it in the camps because, as a Jew, you weren't allowed to speak. If you spoke out of turn, you'd be shot. And he lost it a second time with motor neurone disease. And it felt really beautiful to be able to, I guess, let him reclaim it. I think the thing is what made it a little bit easier is I had Lisa. So, I often say to students when I go to schools, you know, think about your biggest fear or your biggest struggles, your biggest secret, and now give them to someone else and write about them. And it's incredibly freeing. And I had Lisa now. I could pour all my insecurities, all the things that I felt I did wrong or I regretted into this character who was me, but braver. With my dad, I remember I wrote his story. That was my role. I was the scribe over those 5 years. But I always felt a little bit guilty that I hadn't done enough. I hadn't helped shower him and feed him. I was scared, so I avoided it. But Lisa was scared too, but I made her push through that fear. So there were a lot of really beautiful and joyous things about the process. The way far outweighed the difficult aspects.
Thank you. Thank you, Susie. We're going to come back to some of these themes that you both deal with in your books. Trish, thank you for waiting so patiently. I'm mindful at this point, we're thinking about those challenges of getting the information out there, of putting the words on the page and representing those stories. And then there's the challenge at the other end of actually mediating those stories to the target audience, to an audience that is of the same age as those characters. What sort of challenges really as a teacher in the classroom do you find with using literature of this nature?
I think finding the right literature is possibly the most daunting starting point for staff, and feeling comfortable with what you're going to teach. So it has to be, for me, it has to be a primary source or one that you can then take the students through some of those primary sources to support what you're reading. I think for me, the challenge is really giving it the time, the conversation. So whether it be, having a debrief at the end of sessions, really unpacking some of those key scenes that can be really quite hard for kids to put themselves in that place. You need to know your students. You need to be prepared for, questions that you hadn't anticipated. You need to be ready to be really honest with kids as well. They may have questions that you come back to that lead you down a pathway of more information, so they have that context. It depends what they've studied and what they've watched. You may have to look at some stereotypes or some misconceptions, and so I think it's really nice learning that can happen beyond the literature itself and the character and the conflict. I think when it's based on historical events and people, the kids have a real chance to connect with it as well.
Well, let's just to think about that for a moment, because you mentioned also really finding the right text, and you've highlighted there as well, based on real people, and obviously both of these texts that we're speaking about this evening tell the story of actual people and the actual experiences that they had. Is that a better in your eyes than looking at something that is a work of fiction, but that addresses the same themes?
I think there's real problems with using a highly fictionalized, potentially romantic view of World War II and Holocaust. And I think you need to, age appropriate, prepare students for what it is they need to understand. So, for instance, if you're going to look at something like The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, I think now I look at that really critically. And there's far more literature out there that you can use. And I also think choose Australian, choose Victorian, choose Melbourne based. If you can watch something from a survivor's perspective, or you can get an interview online with Susie or Anita, and if you're lucky enough to get them in the classroom, like, try and build those connections so that students in Australia have that connection to Australian literature and the Australian potential Holocaust experience as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think sometimes it can be really daunting because there's so much literature, but if you start to put in some parameters of what you will choose from, that's probably where I still sort of look from, quality literature as well. You want someone that will
Yes.
engage readers, that have a good story to tell. And then I would rather that, they're not then pretending or providing students with, misconceptions. There's already enough misconceptions online,
Yes.
mistruths. So for me, I think as a teacher, that's not somewhere I want to lead students down that pathway.
Thank you, Trish. I think in a lot of ways you highlight a very difficult balance to strike. That on the one hand, it needs to be true and it needs to be factually accurate, but on the other hand, it has to be age appropriate as
Mm.
well. And they're not always the same thing. That sometimes presenting things really as they were means presenting something that might not be appropriate for kids. And I wonder, Susie and Anita, if you found that a challenge in making the text age appropriate in spite of the general content that you were seeking to impart.
Certainly
I,
for me. Yeah, Susie, you might want to answer that first because you've got more. I'll hand
oh,
it over
well,
to
I was
you.
just gonna say, no, I was just going to say that I think it just takes work. And I think we owe the history and our students that work. You've just got to do the work. So I think for me, the way I've found doing it is you focus on individual stories. And, you give students a character to care about. That works for me. Not 6 million Jews, but one,
Mhm.
a kid their age, with the same fears and the same dreams and the same longings, someone they can suffer beside but also triumph with. I think it's really important to make the characters real and flawed. Kids are smart and they know that people are flawed. We all have our own insecurities. We make mistakes, and our characters have to do the same thing. And I think that allows us, with Lisa. I really focused on her being ashamed of her father's growing disability, ashamed of her shared history. She didn't want anyone to know she was Jewish. And that allows me, by looking into her fears and her confusion and her shame, allows her to grow, because you need a character arc. You want the kids to go through this with you, with Lisa, to recognize themselves in her and perhaps learn with her along the way. And I
Mm.
think it's very important you also bear in mind that when you're writing this character, you have to feel all the feels. You have to, when you're that age, everything is so big and momentous and huge, whether it's breaking up with a boyfriend or wearing the wrong shoes to a party. You have to sink into that mindset if you want that story to land. And I think in terms of the Holocaust, and I think it's okay, for kids to be uncomfortable. I think learning in some ways is meant to be uncomfortable and a challenge. And there's ways of dealing with that, which we can talk about later. But I think in terms of age appropriate, you've still got to bear in mind, even though it's a Holocaust story, things like pace and plotting. You have to want the children to
Mhm.
want to turn the page. And of course, the other big rule for YA, for young adult, is no adults as the main character. The kids have to drive the action. The kids have to work through their issues, on their own. Parents are involved, of course, and in my story they are too, but the story has to be sunk into the kids' experience. And I think the last thing I will say is you can't preach. Kids are smart. And so I worked really hard to make sure all the lessons my father taught me, that I pass them on through the action, not through monologue. You've got to be very careful about how you tell the story and the messaging that you want to get through.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. It almost feels, I mean, tell me if if this is a fair, a sort of, a sort of a statement, but it almost feels that in order to present a true and faithful account of your dad, you needed to create a fictitious version of yourself, to kind of, to mediate that, to soften it in some ways and to allow for an understanding of that. Would that be a fair, assessment?
Yeah, and there are so many ways to do it. One way that you can do it without, so to avoid the graphic detail, is you concentrating on characters' internal worlds. So a lot of my story is how my father in the Holocaust chapters, how he felt, what seeing these terrible things did to him, what his relationships were like, as opposed to just really pushing the graphic detail of what was happening in the camps, and you also have escape hatches, moments of light threaded through the book
Yeah.
because no kids want to read unrelentingly sad stories. So there are lots of ways to be gentle but still tell the truth. I think ultimately it's really important. Kids don't want to be lied to. They want to be told the truth, but in a age-appropriate way.
Anita, how did you find that? I mean, there is much within your dad's story that that, if presented really just at face value, would be quite confronting for children. How did you soften it and make your text appropriate for its readership?
Well, I had to look at other YA books because this was not my specialist genre, and I just tried to tap into what I felt my father was really like and relate that to kids, um, at the right level. I sort of tried to bring it down. Obviously, language was very important to have the right language, and also to make sure the book was not too sad, to have some
Mm,
lighter moments, like when Sasha was a poetic license on the author's part here, where he's observing his aunt putting lipstick and getting ready and makeup and everything, and he's just blown away by what this woman's doing. And he's sort of trying to think, oh, is that what I'm supposed to do as a woman? Because he's male. Um, so I found the whole thing challenging, but once it was done and well received, it was very, very rewarding. And I thought, Nana, I have honored your wish. The most important thing here is that I've honored your wish, and I've
mm.
written it. And I had a short movie made, which was wonderful. Which you spoke at when it was shown at GIF Festival in Melbourne. It was shown in Sydney. And I have tried to find a bigger producer to make a bigger movie. That's a very big challenge. And I was at GIF last night, and the filmmakers were saying how there's so much anti-Semitism out there that the filmmakers aren't getting support on Jewish themes.
Mhm.
Um, so that was, that I mean, I knew about it, but it was sad to hear a
Yeah,
panel
that's
was
very
looking.
upsetting.
Yeah, it was very upsetting.
It sounds so far as the themes are concerned, and so far as the ways in which those themes are mediated, there is certainly a broad consensus here in any case that these things cannot be confronting, and we're not seeking an emotional response. But again, I mean, coming back to where we were before, I feel a lot of that happens in the classroom, and it happens in the home. A lot of that is, Trish, you mentioned those debriefs afterwards. Are there any other things that you might recommend as well in order to sort of ensure that children, when they're reading material of this nature, are not being confronted or upset by it, in any way?
I don't encourage the students to try and find their own additional information. I recommend other books to read if they're
Mhm.
interested. So those students that find they have a bit of an interest where you not ignite that spark, I'll look at other different types of literature for them to look at. I think, yeah, I'm not sure
I
what
think that's a
else.
key. You mentioned that before,
Yeah,
didn't you, in terms of just how many sort of historically inaccurate sites they
yeah.
might encounter if they're searching online. When you say that though, is it just around the accuracy of the information, or is it also around other issues?
It can also be the graphic nature of some of the photographs they might encounter online that they're not prepared yet to see. Or yeah, I think knowing your kids is really important. And like, you will have some students who just stay behind and want to have that extra chat with you.
Mm,
And I think, that's, I mean, key to teaching is relationships and being, relatable. And I think just acknowledging that the students have these queries and have these questions, and I think kind of then funneling that interest in a safe way if they're going to look at further material.
Right.
So yeah, and keep engaging with them, you know, both in discussion, in group discussion in the classroom, and don't be scared to, you know, to unpack a really heavy scene, so to speak, and then, you know, get the kids to talk to each other about what they're thinking and feeling about. And you'll be amazed at the kids who will open up in similarities. I mean, you're talking about themes like bravery, courage, resilience, love, compassion, humanity. Like any student will have a different take or a different, you know, story of their own life that they can potentially connect with that, you know, regardless of it being set in another country, in another age, and going through these really difficult things. Students go through difficult, you know, phases of their life, and you just can never underestimate those students in the classroom
Absolutely.
who will find that connection. And all of these characters are 13 and 14 and 15. You know, they're not 21 and 28. So I find that if it is, you know, your memoir, your historical fiction, like you're not looking at anything that's, you know, fabricated. The kids then, you know, a lot of the books, like I know Anita, your book has got beautiful photos of your, you know, father's family in it. The kids, that's where I would then say, let's unpack these photos. What do we see? What are they thinking in this photo? What are they wearing? And, you know, I think that can be something that you just have to direct them, but then be expected for them to have other things that they want to look at.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
just,
We've
I
Yes,
was just
please
going
go
to
ahead.
second what Patricia said, because I think, you know, people think Holocaust stories and they just think about, you know, the scenes and the images they, you know, might have seen, you know, in history books. But it's also a time of rebuilding and resilience and, you know, recreation and love and hope and everything that Patricia said. There's so many themes to dig into. And the other thing that I agree with you, Patricia, is that we shouldn't be too scared of being sad sometimes. You know, the Holocaust was sad. And, you know, it sounds weird, but when kids tell me that they read my book and they cried, I'm like, yes, because
Yeah.
I want kids to care, right? Because if they care, they might do something about it. You know, maybe next time we're in schoolyard, they might stop a kid from being bullied, or they might not judge someone by the color of their skin or the weird shoes they wear to school. You know, we are teaching them much deeper lessons, you know,
Yeah.
and universal lessons. And it's okay. In fact, books are the safest space to go to those dangerous places because they can put the book down, they can come back to it, they can talk about it in class with their teacher. It's the perfect time for kids to kind of confront those things and reflect back on them, you know, in how they want to live their own lives.
It's very, very beautifully put, and I think that really underscores the fact that we're doing more than teaching history. It's more than just learning specific events and understanding the sequence of those events, but there's something perhaps more formative here in engaging with these stories. One of the things I think that we've been somewhat concerned with in these responses is, you know, upsetting children and distressing them, and we're very mindful of not doing that. But I'm also mindful of you know, the graphic content of films that they might be seeing or other books that they might be reading, and I wonder, and I really put this not just to you, Trish, but really to the three of you, if you feel that there is a degree to which children are becoming somewhat desensitized as a result of a lot of this media.
I'm happy to have a go at that one. I think probably the short answer to are they being desensitized is potentially yes, given the number of hours we know kids are spending on screens, watching films. A lot of the time, they're not talking to other people. They're not, I suppose, debriefing. They're not discussing. They're not analysing. Um, so in saying that, I think kids are very savvy, and if they're not
Mm,
interested in something, they won't watch it, they won't continue with it, as Susie said. And I also think kids have grown up on screens and are very clear on what real and not real is. I think, you know, that can maybe be blurred sometimes, but I think kids reading, you know, material that is based in fact, You know, there's a person, there's a name. It's not that it isn't someone that they know, but that it was a person that was 14, 13. There's a reality to this person that they're reading about.
Mm.
But
Which again
yeah,
highlights.
yeah. I think again, like I would rather than, you know, talk about someone being born in Poland and traveling to Australia and, you know, getting the kids to look at that geographically. Imagine having to take the boat, you know, across to Italy and then spending days. I know, Susie, your dad was in a camp, and Anita, your father came across from, spent some time in Italy from memory, you know, and talking to the kids about the fact that it takes time to travel to another country, the decision that Sasha's mother makes, you know, where to go after World War II ends, and, you know, to come to Australia. I think there was like a system with a visa where they were lucky they were accepted to Australia and not America. And looking then at, you know, immigration and who else was coming to Australia and why. So it just feels like you can then jump to these other, you know, connections that they can make, like who in the class has got a parent or a grandparent who was born in, and you can, you know, you then bring in that everyone has got their own story, and everyone in here is in some way like this character, whether it's male or female or the age or the place of birth, like. And then as I said, you go back to those themes again. So for me, you know, in the classroom, you don't want the kids to just read in isolation and respond to a written response and, you know, oh great, you can write that paragraph. I think you really need to unpack the reality and the life and the humanity. Yeah.
Yes. It sounds like there's a lot of work in mediation, that it's partly about, choosing the right text, but then it's really about ensuring that the kids are engaging with it appropriately and meaningfully, and affirming a meaning from it that is relevant to their lives as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's, so I was going to say,
No,
I
no,
think
please.
that's what's, you can talk about desensitization and all the violent video games, but that's what's so special about stories, especially sad stories, because they invite us into someone else's skin, to imagine what it might be like and to understand one other person, another way of like living and losing and hurting and healing. And um, it's very personal. And I think when you get it right and you get in there, they really feel it. Kids really feel it.
You've both, Susie and Anita, you've both, been to classrooms and you've spoken with students about your work. Has anyone ever really floored you with a question? Has anyone, ever asked you anything, or demonstrated a level of engagement with your text that was surprising?
I
I
think, oh, you go.
sorry, I didn't encounter that. I was just happy that they did engage, that and they were curious. Whatever question they asked, they were curious about something that came from the book. And I found a lot of disbelief. Was your father really, was he
Mm.
acting, like a girl? He grew his hair. He had to learn the verbs in Polish. Verbs are gender based. So there's a different pronunciation when you're speaking. So my grandmother taught my father to answer as a girl, and she taught him deportment, so putting a book on his head and walking straight,
Mm.
holding himself erect, all those things that, one doesn't think about. I think they were quite blown away by something like that, for instance.
I feel it's one of the uh, more impactful parts of your book, actually, that process of his trying to become a girl and what that meant for him psychologically, being at a point in his life where he was interested in girls, and now needing to be one, and how he negotiated that sort of a transition linguistically and in terms of dress. And I wonder, even actually at this point, if I might invite you to read something from your book.
Yeah, I would like to. It's the chapter called How to Be a Girl. So I'll read a page and then skip a bit and read maybe one more because it'll round it off. So Okay. Um, The truth was, if I'd been a girl, then it would have been far easier for Mama to keep me safe. There would be no risk of the SS soldiers pulling down my trousers and checking to see if I was circumcised. But still, I couldn't believe what Mama was asking me to do. Mama, you must be completely mad. I leapt up and paced around the room. Sasha, look at what is happening out there. You know I'm right. The SS will not ask Salah, a girl, to drop her trousers. We now have Aryan papers. They say who we are. We are who we are, he said. But Mama would not listen. The passports have no photographs, they're just documents, and I don't look Jewish, and neither will you as a girl with blue eyes and blonde hair. This is how we can survive, Sasha. But I'm not a girl. I can't be a girl. Of course you can, and you must. She reached out a hand to me, but I pushed it away and just stared at the wall. I felt tears beginning. I'm going to jump here because there's still quite a bit more. My heart was thumping. Mama, I don't know about being a girl. I only know you, Aunt Manya, Binka, and Rena. I know that you cook and run the home. I know that you are emotional and you fight and scream at each other, then kiss and forgive. I know that you bleed once a month and have babies and all that. Then I stopped and didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what to say. I was nothing like a girl. And there's more of that in this chapter, but I know that, I'm mindful of time.
Thank you, Anita. It's very powerful, and I think it gives people a sort of a taste, not just for the content of the book, but how it's conveyed. And I think it really highlights as well, if I may, what Trish you were saying before about that need to, be honest with kids, and not to pull your punches, to really tell the story as it was, but to present it in a way that is, it's informative, and it's allowing them to engage with something that they might not have known about before when it comes to the history of this period, but to do so empathetically.
I had a
Um,
chat, I had a chat with my dad. He knew I was wanting to write this book, and I asked him how he felt, if he was okay about it. His mother had asked me to do it, everything. And then there was a period I asked him, there are some key scenes. Would you be happy just to write in your voice and give me your voice? And my intent was to write in my grandmother's voice, and where I could parallel with my father. So I'd have their two voices and their two perspectives coming in. Well, my father agreed to do it. He did do it. He gave me the papers, and I was renovating my home with little children, and we had to move out. And guess what happened to those amazing papers?
oh,
They got lost.
shame.
So, that I thought I'm going to die at that moment. Like, I was so upset and distressed. And then I knew I had to really use my imagination when I was writing this and try and tap into my boys. What were my boys like when they were that age? I had
Mm.
two of them. I had to really think back because they were already older. What were they like and how would they have reacted? And, you know,
Yeah, thank
yeah.
you. It's what an upsetting thing to happen, and yet what an impetus to really just to hunker down and to tap into something.
I had to go, like Susie said, dig deep.
Yeah,
I had to dig deep.
yeah.
And
Thank
that,
you.
that loss of not hearing, not being able to ask your father again, something I talk about a lot with students is that, we think we know our parents, but we don't. We don't ask questions. We don't ask the right questions. And our grandparents, because the kids are young, and I always encourage them to sit down and just start talking, because I was lucky. It was almost, too late, but I had that chance. It's just so special.
Yeah. Well, did you find, Susie, did you find any challenges in terms of trying to capture your dad's voice as a child? How did you go about tapping into that?
Well, I mean, we had hours and hours and hours of tape recorded interviews when, he spent those 25 hours telling us his story. I started there. And then, of course, there are so many gaps. My
Mm,
father told us his story, but there was so much he left out. I think a lot of the horror was beyond words. There was so much he summarized. And so there was a lot of research going back to, original sources, other boys who, were in the same camp and so forth. And there was imagination and
Yes.
being able to add dialogue and feelings that my father hadn't touched on. I don't know. Once I got into it, I was just there, and I was with my dad. He was on my shoulder, and I don't know. It just worked.
I think one of the things, just from my perspective as a reader, one of the things that was so compelling, Susie, about your book is this kind of this sort of like a joint timeline. Like we're in two places at the same time. We're there with you as a young girl, or a young version of yourself here in Australia, and we're also reading this story that is set 80 years ago, and you juxtapose those very nicely, and I wonder if I might also invite you to read a short section from your book.
Yeah, sure, sure I will. Yeah, I was really keeping in mind when I was writing for young adults that I wanted to create two ways into the story, two characters that could help them understand the now of hearing the story and the then of living the story. So I'm just going to read a little bit, a chapter set in the 1980s where Lisa is 15 years old and has just found out that her father is dying. Dad pulls a handkerchief from his pocket and passes it to Mum. Life's not always about the happily ever after, he says. Sometimes it's just about living the best you can with what you've got. Sometimes it's just about not giving up. He smiles at Mum and she smiles back, a weak imitation. I'm not going to lie in bed and cross days off a calendar. I'm not going to let this disease ruin more than one life. He tries for a smile. And I'm not going to spend the next 6 months crying. We have a lot to talk about. There are things you should know about my childhood. He blinks and clears his throat. About what happened. There's a long silence, and then his words fill the room. I want you to know who I am and what they did to us. I can't hear what he says next because a bomb has gone off in my brain. My father wants to tell us who he is. I know who you are, I want to say. You're my dad, and soon you won't be. So I really don't want to spend our time talking about a past that's already dead, a past you kept secret. Secret's never good, so please let's not do this, I don't say. But my eyes must be telegraphing every word because Dad has put down his fork and is reaching for my hand. One of my jobs as your dad is to tell you where I grew up and why I left. So one day you'll understand where you come from. I owe you that. Do we have to? I look over at my brothers, hoping for support. But Jack leaves the room and comes back with Dad's video recorder and an empty tape. Great idea, Tom says. Lisa, do you still have that cassette recorder? I find a blank tape in my desk and write Dad's Story, Part 1, in tiny letters on the small rectangular sticker, knowing that as soon as I press record, the door to my old life will slam shut. Everyone has secrets, but I have the feeling ours are worse than most. And then just a little bit from the then chapter, which is set in wartime in my dad's voice. I was a lonely kid. In Czechoslovakia, kids didn't play with Jews. They spat at us and called us dogs. They beat us up. I can't remember my classmates' names or their faces, but I remember the taste of blood in my mouth and the teachers who turned away and pretended not to see. I saw things a 10-year-old boy shouldn't see, things I'll never be able to unsee. I saw soldiers force a family of 5 onto their hands and knees to lick the sidewalk clean. I saw them string a boy to a tree. Home and synagogue were the only places where I felt safe and loved. The room was cold and the wooden bench seats hard, but I could sit there for hours, feeling important just being near Tata. He'd concentrate more on his prayers than on me, but sometimes he'd draw me close and let me warm my hands in his pocket. And if I prayed hard and sat very still, he'd smile at me, a lopsided half smile, and call me by my pet name, Elyuka. The next time he used that name, Elyuka, it was March 1944, the last night of Passover, when the Hungarian officers pounded at our door. Tata sent me to my room. What is it, Tata? I crept into the kitchen as soon as the soldiers left. He was holding a piece of paper. He looked so sad. It's an order, Elyuka, from the Hungarian military command. We have to gather at the synagogue tomorrow. We're going on a trip. Tata had called me Elyuka. We weren't in synagogue, and I hadn't done anything to make him proud. Something bad was about to happen.
Gosh, that's very powerful. Thank you very much, Susie. It's I mean I think that juxtaposition of two children is very effective, and I think look, thank you very much for reading that aloud to give people a sense as to the flavor of both of those texts, and to their general content. Um, I have some other questions I would like to ask, but I would at this point also like to invite our other attendees this evening to please feel free to pop any questions that you may have into the chat box that our panelists might respond to them. And while people are thinking about questions they might like to put in, one that I'd like to put to all three of you. We've spoken already a great deal about what to do in terms of, you know, how to frame a story and how to mediate that story and how to ensure that kids are appreciating the story. Uh, do you have any don't do's, anything that you might caution people when it comes to either producing a material of this nature for this age group or in terms of mediating this sort of material to school age students?
I'm happy to start. I was going to say, do your homework. I think it's really important that when you write fiction, even based on fact, that you do the work, that you spend time at the Holocaust Museum, that you interview survivors, that you read memoirs, watch testimonies, and it's important not to rely on one source. Even though my dad told me his story, I really needed to go back and make sure that everything he told me was accurate, because even though there were elements of the story that were fictional, I wanted to make sure it had to happen. The other thing that I did, which I think is really important, is when I finished, I gave it to a Holocaust expert um, to read. And I said, I need to know that everything that happened in this story,
Mm,
even the fiction elements, could have happened. I need to know that the uniforms were right, that what they ate was correct, that the way they lined up for roll call, because students, even though teachers will tell them this is fiction based on fact, they will, when they're reading it, take much of it
mm.
as true. So we have to do the work, I think.
Yes, I think that's very true. Thank you. Thank you, Susie.
I might
Uh,
add that. Oh, no, you go, Anita.
you sure? I've got just
Yeah.
something quick. What Susie said before, use action if you're writing in this vein to use action rather than telling a story fully, so that the action tells the story. I would agree with Susie on that one, and I was trying to be very mindful to do that when I was writing I Am Sasha.
Hmm.
So, and Penguin was my publisher, and they had somebody to check all the facts um, after I had submitted the text. They had a specialist to do that. Penguin's a big publisher. If you're lucky enough to have one, and I was with this book, they have resources.
Mm.
You know, not every publisher has that.
Thanks. Thank you, Anita. And I think again that really highlights the importance of, you know, even when you're writing something that's based on a person's experiences, to really try to get those little details correct. Thank
And
you.
I was happy about it because history's my background. I did history at uni. So when I was one of three um, recipients of shortlisted for the Premier's History Prize, I was so excited. I was so happy because apart from Penguin having that person, I was checking and double checking all the historical
Yeah.
facts, using multiple sources, making sure it was accurate. I didn't want any mistakes.
Thank you. And Trish, any don't do's?
Oh, I was thinking more do, but
Uh-huh.
I can think of
No, no,
don't in
no,
a
no, no.
second.
No, no, no. What were your do's?
I think know the text,
Mm,
and by that I mean look at the parts of the text that might mention a ghetto or a propaganda poster or a particular food, and create yourself a short PowerPoint of visuals. Go jump on the Melbourne Holocaust Museum's website if you need supportive material. But I think the key images will supplement when you read the novel to then talk about this is what it looked like, and it might be another person, it might be a different story, but the kids then have a visual to walk away with. Or, you know, if you're talking about how crowded a ghetto was, or the limitations of the range of food they could eat, you might be able to source some other type of primary document that will support their understanding. And it doesn't have to be a video or a long YouTube clip. It could just be supplementing it with one quick image and then moving on. So that you're just providing the students another way of looking at the history in this novel, so that they can put the two together and start to, yeah, as you said, Susie and Anita, you know, fact checking and providing all that historical information in your book is so important. But I think visuals really, some of the kids just need those visuals to remember and learn and soak it all in. Yeah.
I was also going to say, Simon, that it's often it can be really helpful for teachers to get in touch with the publishers. I know for Inkflower, they prepared the education department like a 14-page teachers' resources, which are just amazing, going through every single chapter, activities, questions, and that can be really helpful for teachers that are, you know, pressed for time.
Absolutely. Look, that actually leads us to one of the questions that has just popped in. We have a few questions that have come in. One of which, and I'll frame this initially for you, Trish. When you're building your lesson plans, what are the sorts of essential supports you need from a librarian in supporting that?
I would suggest that you work out how long you've got to teach, so you know the time frame. I would suggest that you look at the other supportive texts in whether they're fiction or non-fiction, that the librarian can support you with. As I said, you may have students who are super keen, and there might be another author, another text that they can read that's fiction. The non-fiction that you may actually be able to use in there as well. I think your teacher librarians have such a wealth of knowledge that if you can tap into them, I'm sure that they will bring up and have knowledge of other things that you possibly haven't even thought about in relation to the author themselves in the book, or the greater kind of themes, geography, whatever it is that you want to, you know, focus in on. I think if you've got a really good teacher librarian at your school, that's just probably your first step.
Susie and Anita, from your perspective, if kids are coming to a library because they want to engage more with this history, having read your books, what are the sorts of things that you would really like the librarian to do to further cater to those learnings? Anything that you would really hope that they would be directed towards?
Yeah, I think as a fiction writer, my goal is the same as any eyewitness or memoirist, and that is to remember. So it's just fiction is a different way of coming to the same place. So I always say that, I provide fiction to spark kids' curiosity to learn more, and then to go to the memoirs, to go to the history books, and those original sources, to go to the museum and speak, hear from an actual live survivor while they're there. The museum has incredible sources where they can ask questions of survivors. I think there's thousands of questions that survivors have answered, and they can go, I think, holograms, all sorts of amazing stuff. So I do that. And also encourage the teacher librarians to get in touch with us authors, because, we're more than happy to come to schools. It's just an absolute bonus and joy to speak to students. It's always a fantastic experience, and it just lends, as Trish said, that extra their authenticity, and they're allowed to ask. I go in for lots of Q&As, and I say, ask me anything, and it just adds a little bit of a deepening of the story, I guess.
Thank you. Thanks, Susie. I might come back to that actually in a moment, but I'll allow Anita first to respond as well, if there's anything
I
that you
haven't
would
got
also hope.
anything to add. I was going to say the same thing. So Susie's sort of said it for both of us.
I will note as well, actually, Susie, having mentioned at the library at the Melbourne Holocaust
Mm.
Museum, that our librarian can also direct people to a number of age-appropriate memoirs written by survivors in our community that also touch on some of these themes as well. That may also deepen and enrich that connection to this history, because as I think we've got a very solid sense of already in this conversation, these are fundamentally Melbourne stories. There are so many Melbourne stories that intersect with the stories that Susie and Anita you have immortalized in your texts, and that we can engage with to really deepen that understanding. And not all of these are for children, of course. We've been focusing very much on things that are for kids, but um, Susie and Anita, do you see your books, Inkflower and I Am Sasha in particular, as also being adult literature?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, they're, I think, yes, they're universal.
Yeah,
Yes.
I've as many adults as kids read my books, and I think it's a mistake to write down for children. They're smart and they want to be stretched both in terms of literature, language, but also story. And so, yeah, it's often a very appropriate for older readers too.
I want to thank those people who are popping questions into the chat. Please do keep them coming. Another question that has come in, which I will actually put to the three of you as well, is for the benefit of parents. What might parents do to best prepare their children, either for reading Inkflower and I Am Sasha, or for engaging with age-appropriate Holocaust literature in general?
Well, if I was the parent, I would read the book first.
Hmm.
I would read the book first, and
That's
then
good advice.
and then I think just reading the book would enable them to prepare the children a lot more,
Mm.
and then it's something they can talk about with their children. They can
Hmm.
share ideas and they can share stories and whatever, and perhaps the parents might bring their own family experiences and link up to what the story that the children are reading. So I think it would be enriching.
Thanks, Anita. I don't know if Trish or Susie, you would have anything that you would add to that.
I totally agree. I think having that conversation with your parents is a fabulous idea, and almost like a mini book club. You could reread chapters and then have discussion points at the end of it. Um, yeah, and I think, some novels will even have those kind of book club type
Hmm.
questions at the back, or you could very easily look at some teacher notes. And that doesn't have to be onerous. It could be just one question and just have that conversation. And as you said before, I think it was Simon, you said the Melbourne Holocaust Museum has like even online resources for both movies and books. And I believe they're in age group too. So,
Yeah.
if you've got a younger child, you're not sure what they should be looking at or what they should be reading, you can actually, age appropriate, I think, is an interest level. If the kids are interested, I would say then that's your open invitation to read it, have a conversation, and get involved.
Mm. That I suppose highlights an aspect that we haven't really looked at the moment. I mean, oftentimes material of this nature, to some degree, sells itself. I think there is a degree to which children are implicitly interested in certain histories, but it's certainly not always the case. And I wonder if any of you have any advice as to how to engage when there is a lack of engagement. I don't know if Trish, that's something you ever face in your professional practice, um, but it's sort of from the opposite side of where we were coming from, I suppose. Like, how do you bring kids in?
I think, having well written literature and engaging stories, and I think selling it, sometimes you have to sell things to
Hmm.
kids. So you might pose a question about a journey. I'm just thinking the Once series.
Hmm.
Morris Gleitzman, you know, for junior readers, and the character of Felix, or, you know, a picture storybook. Or I think, you know, if you're engaged and you're interested, and, you know, you can give the kids that kind of something to engage in and find out. So, Anita, I would almost, you know, start talking to the boys in the group about, well, why do boys dress up as girls at the end of the year? And why is it such a funny thing for a boy to wear a dress? And that gender, that notion of, well, what does it mean to be a boy or a girl? And then bring in the fact that, you know, we've got this book and this is what we're going to look at, and these are some key questions, but we're going to take it back to a very different setting. So I think all these stories that, you know, we're thinking of using, as I said, I would go back to the key themes and look at choices and look at bravery and look at, you know, I always look for the positive and the compassion and the care and the humanity. All of these stories have someone who does something so small, but it is such a huge difference, usually to the main character. And I find that, you know, you need to highlight that to children, and you need to explain that that's, you know, where you want our society to be. I think they get the obvious, you know, don't be like this, don't do that. But I think looking at those key themes, and then just posing those questions to kids today about who they want to be, because they're forming their identities and they're deciding who they want to be and what they want to represent and where they want to go and what they want to do. And, you know, you want these books to pose all these questions, so that they can safely navigate it later in their own life as well.
I
I
have
think
written a
I got off track there. Sorry.
I've written a teacher resource uh, document to go with I Am Sasha, so to help teachers in the classroom. So that should be available with the book, maybe on the Penguin site, I Am Sasha. And it's got lists of themes and questions and activities like Susie's done. And I think those sort of resources are helpful.
Yes, for
You know,
parents as
for
well.
for teachers and parents, and
Mm.
you know, maybe the teacher could send something home to the parent that they could work together on with the students. So it's a three-way thing. I mean,
Yeah.
parents and teachers are very busy. I understand that. So it's probably a bit idealistic, but anyway, it's just an idea.
I think
Um,
to what Trish was saying before about using it as an opportunity to create change makers, and inspire kids. And I often, you know, talk to kids because I think it's can be very overwhelming. And people tend to say, well, I'm only one person, can't really make a difference. And I like to look at it, you know, another way. And like imagine if a million of us are just one small thing each. And I think Holocaust books are perfect for that because, you know, my father survived by the kindness of strangers many times, you know, a kind guard or a brave neighbour.
mm,
And there are so many instances of that, doing small acts of kindness, small things to make kids feel very powerful, make them understand that the world can be a terrifying place for some, but we have the power um, to make a difference. And I think
mm,
that's a really fantastic way to start, you know,
mm.
with kids.
Yeah, and a very empowering one as well, because it's really all about agency, isn't it? And it's all about their choices. Thank you. Thank you very much for responding, all of you, so candidly, to those questions. And another one has popped in actually, which I'm going to address to Susie and Anita, and it concerns whether or not there was anything in your stories that was difficult for you to write.
You want to go first? You go first,
No,
Anita.
you can go first. I have to think about that one.
Okay. Well, actually, there was one thing that was the most incredibly difficult thing, which I didn't get to include in the book, was as I was researching the novel, 18 years after my father passed, I found out that my father, he'd always told us he was the youngest of five, but found out that in fact he had two younger siblings, a 3 and a 9-year-old. When they went to Auschwitz, would have gone, you know, straight to the left and straight to the gas. They wouldn't have survived. And you know it was just incredibly sad to think that my father might have, you know, suppressed that memory so deeply because it was so hard to deal with. And I'd always known him as this sunny, positive guy, but really realised through that no one gets through something like that unscarred. And I had this grand idea of, because when kids went to Auschwitz, there was no record of their death. If they didn't work, they weren't put to work first. If they were sent straight to the gas, there was no record. So these two young boys didn't have death certificates. They didn't have birth certificates because in their village, the people at the local town hall destroyed all the government records so that the Jews couldn't be identified, which was a beautiful thing in that small village. But these boys had no birth or death records. I had this wonderful idea of just having two blank pages in my book with their names, almost like gravestones, to finally put them to rest. But as my publisher said rightly, that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
It's too big, and if you do it, you need to do it properly. But there were many things like that, that were uncovered, that were sad but important.
And if I may ask, actually, before I give Anita a space to respond, is that a project that you're considering?
In the back of my mind, it's always there. They're always there. My uncles are always there. Maybe one day.
Thanks, Susie.
I think the horror of the events that transpired in the Holocaust and that I discuss or describe in the book, a reminder of what actually happened, what people had to go through, the loss of my family because of the Holocaust, the loss of power and agency they felt they didn't have, and then my grandmother reclaimed that power and agency when she was brave in 1942 and said to my father, "You're going to become a girl." So, bittersweet.
Yeah.
It was the negative turning into a positive, and she pulled it off. Had she not have come up with that idea in 1942, who knows what would have happened to them?
It is interesting how, you said that you were initially writing it in her voice, and although you ended up writing it in your dad's voice, it's very much her story in a lot of ways. In many respects, she is the main character of the story.
She was
Albeit
the
with someone in the
brainchild, yeah.
background.
He was the
Yeah.
driving force and the brainchild, but he was her reason for living because she had lost her husband before the war. My grandfather dropped dead suddenly doing up his shoelace. He was about 40,
Uh-huh.
right before the war. So she was widowed with this little boy on her own. She had her father, she had a stepmother, she had her sisters, and then all the sisters were together in Poland during the war. And after liberation, one went to Israel, one went to the States, one went to Australia.
Uh-huh.
Can you believe that? They all
Mhm.
survived the war in Poland together. And then they got papers. My father had a heart murmur, so he wasn't accepted into America for that reason. They might have gone with one sister to America.
Although the question that came through concerned things that might be challenging to write, I might also ask Trish if there is anything relating to these stories that poses a challenge to teach, and if there's something that might better facilitate the process of teaching it, or aspects that simply remain difficult.
I think they're difficult. I don't think English teachers shy away from difficult texts and difficult ideas. And I think for me, you have a real responsibility to teach good literature and
Hmm.
engaging stories. And I want my students, potentially now that don't read a lot, to read one good book a year or two or three good
Hmm.
books a year. And, I feel like I have that almost a superpower to put a text in their hands that potentially gets them to read more or find other works by this author or challenges a notion they already have and gets them to think a different way. And I don't know, I don't shy away from, not say an argument in the classroom, but defending, explaining, exploring. Like, I think those moments where you have students you know, like I had Susie Zale in, my classroom earlier this year, and those moments between a student and an author at an end of a unit where you've looked at, 6 weeks of World War II from beginning to end, and you've talked about so many different things, for them to sit down with someone whose father survived the war and has now gone on to have a career and have a family, and to hear them speak in person, I think you have the real potential for kids to see what remembrance really means, whose story, is going to be told, when is it going to be told. Like, I just think students know when they see and hear things that are important. And I
Yes.
think literature has that capacity to really, I think, open your heart to other people and places and things. And I think before you get into a prescribed VCE list, junior fiction is just this incredible world to be in.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think
Absolutely.
dive into it and be prepared to cry in front of your kids, and, connect and tell the kids what you're thinking and feeling, and don't be scared to open up to them so that they can open up to you. And, it just becomes a really safe place for everyone to learn and grow. And, you spend so much time with students, day to day, week to week, in a year, you have a real chance to make a difference.
That's very beautiful. Thank you. And I think that also goes a long way towards addressing that other question about the applicability of this literature for adult readers as well. I think there is something very powerful about both of these two texts, as well as so many others that really get to the experiences of individual survivors and individual experiences during the Holocaust. I will note actually on that point, it remains, God willing, far into the future, possible to meet with the living witness to history. The day, of course, will come when it won't be possible to meet with the survivor. And texts like these do a lot of that. They facilitate a lot of that engagement with those stories without meeting that person, but hearing from a child of survivors who can share those experiences in an age appropriate way is a very special thing. Um, I am mindful of the time, and I'm very much want to thank our panelists for joining us this evening. Asking if there's anything that you might have not said so far that you wish to impart, or any writers who have a story that they might like to tell. I just got that dreaded warning on the screen that says my internet connection is unstable,
Yeah.
and I hope uh, okay. I think internet
I
just
think we're
became a
unfrozen.
little bit
Yeah.
funky.
And
I hope that people
now we're all
can
right.
hear me. Oh, well, I'm pleased if that's going to happen. I'm pleased if that's going to happen. It's going to happen at the end of the webinar and not at the beginning. It's that dreaded "your internet connection is unstable" message that we all hate and fear. But I don't know if that was if my question was lost to the ethers, but I just wonder if any of you have any further message that you might like to impart before we finish up.
I just maybe repeat something that my dad always said to me, and that was, we have to talk about the things that scare us before we can change them. And so that's what I keep doing. I think that's what Trish keeps doing, and we all, um, just hope that kids will continue to engage with these really important issues.
Thank you, Susie.
And hopefully kids will read Susie's book and my book and books like them. in the classroom.
Absolutely. Thank
And
you,
champion
Anita.
Australian books. Yeah, definitely champion Australian books.
Yeah, 100%. I think something, Trish, that you mentioned before, in terms of this not just being something that happened, a long time ago and on the other side of the world. I think we cut through that when we look at these local stories, when we look at the bless you, when we look at
Thank you.
these these Melbourne stories that really bring it to this cultural landscape, and when things are mediated through the voice of a child during the Holocaust, that cuts through that history as well, and really highlights the immediacy and the relevancy of these materials. I want to thank the three of you for your time and your candor in responding to these questions, and for the fascinating insights that you had. But above all, I want to take this opportunity to thank the three of you for the work that you are doing in making this history more broadly known and understood, and ensuring that children are drawing really life-affirming messages from these materials. Thank you so much, and very much appreciate your time on this webinar tonight.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Thank you to the panel.
Thank you,
Trish,
everyone.
Susie, thank you.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everybody for joining us this evening. Thank you to all of the folks who were popping questions into the chat, and I look forward to engaging with you further at the Melbourne Holocaust Museum, and to seeing you around. If you go to our website, mhm.org.au/events, you can see a number of other events, both online and in person, that we have coming up, and I certainly look forward to seeing you there. I will, on that note, bid everyone a good night. Thank you very much, Trish, and Anita, and Susie.
Thank you. Good night, all.
Thanks.
Good night.
Thank you.